Hello fellow ArcViz people. Uh, Today I decided I wanted to do a render, something I don't do very often, and that is rendering people from images in Vray. I'm going to be doing this in Rhino. So I've set up a small scene. I have this little weird building. I've already done a quick render. As you can see here, really basic materials. Got a ground plane. The building has tune materials put on everything, as you can see here. So I have basically the dark color, I have the medium, which looks white, and then I have another, which is the ground plane. Basic 2 is actually the same thing as basic 1. I just change the colors, doesn't matter. Anyways, I made a tune for each of those, and then I also made a tune for the glass, for the windows and the skylights, or the clerestories, pardon me. Inside the building I have lights, because I'm going to be putting somebody inside the building as well as having somebody outside. I have a global illumination V-ray sun, so that we can put some shadows in, and you can see how this technique really makes people and shadows a very fast solution for populating your renders. It doesn't come without flaws, but those flaws are really easily overlooked, and if you can do the technique quickly, then those flaws become really quite trivial. So I'll show you the people that we're working with. I have loaded them up in Photoshop. This XOIO, they make really amazing scale people. They have TIFF format images, which supports layers, so in Photoshop it's really handy. They do an amazing job, and you can turn all that off, and you can see that the spokes and everything, it looks really amazing. I can put a link to their website in the description. So this is going to be one guy. He's going to be on the outside. And then we have this girl who is freaked out by this creepy toy horse. She does not have any layers. She is on a black background. Fortunately, this image came with an alpha channel. I don't know why they did it this way, but I will show you how to use these two images to create this girl and her horse as a scale figure, and make a alpha with this guy. So to get started on that, the first thing we're going to do is turn off all of the background junk, and we want to save this image with just him on. It's not mandatory because we're going to be creating the mask anyway, so all that other stuff would go away. It's just easier to visualize. So I'm going to call this bike guy, and that should have been a JPEG. You can do JPEG or you can do PNG. V-Ray for Rhino does not support transparency of PNGs or TIFFs or any other file type for that matter, as far as I know. So then under this image, under the main image, we're going to do a black layer. So in Photoshop, if you don't have black already, you can just push D and that resets your colors to black and white. So we're going to make that black, and then if you hold Command or Control on a PC or on a Mac or a PC, and you click the thumbnail, it'll outline all the contents of that layer. So since it was really well cropped out, that makes it really great. And then you can do anything really, but I'm just going to go ahead and go back to this layer and push X to switch my foreground and background, and I'm going to push Alt or Option on a Mac and backspace, and you can see it filled it in white. So when I turn this guy off, I have this black and white image. Now you can make another layer and color that white, or you can do what I did and make it on the same black and white layer, or you can just turn this guy hue and saturation with Command or Control U and just turn his lightness all the way up. But I like to practice by preserving editability and color and stuff of this guy, or whatever the layer is. Anyways, there's a ton of different ways you can do it, but this is a way that I do it, and it's quick and easy. So I'm going to save that as also a JPEG, bike guy underscore alpha. So now you can see we basically have the guy and his bike, and his alpha, the girl and her horse, and then their alpha. So that's an easy way to make an alpha channel on an already decent or awesome supplied image. Cutting people out from the background is a completely different story, and it's really frustrating and not going to be covered in this video. Anyways, so we're going to go back to Rhino. Now what you can do is create a plane, but the issue with creating a plane to put that material on is that creating a plane does not constrain the proportions. So we want to bring the image of that guy on his bicycle in while constraining its proportions, so that he doesn't get stretched outside horizontally or vertically. So go ahead and type picture frame. We'll bring the guy in, and then we're going to stretch our image out just an arbitrary amount. So there's excess around this guy. There's room under his tire and there's room above his head. So what we need to try and focus on is making sure that his head from his feet is whatever height we determine. I will determine that he is 5'8". So what I want to do is move his feet down to the ground plane. His tire is going under the ground plane, and that's fine. We'll fix that later because we want him to have a set height. And it really doesn't matter too much, but keeping track of that helps you to make your overall composition feel more accurate, so that way you don't have freakishly tall people or whatever. So what I'm going to do next is just create a line. I'm going to snap to the ground plane here, and I'm going to type 5'8". Hit enter. Now I'm going to move this guy. I'm going to click this intersection. I have my snap on intersection, and I'm going to move that to the point. So then I'm going to type scale. I'm going to snap on this intersection or end, and I have ortho on so that if I move my mouse over here, it's still going vertically, and that's really helpful because now I can move my cursor over his head instead of trying to figure out, oh, is that over his head, is that over his head, but it's much easier this way. So I'll just kind of figure that right there. That's about it, and I'm going to move along this line until I get to that end point. So now from the top of his head down to his feet are going to be the length of this line that we made, which is 5'8". Now his tire is under the ground plane, and that will not look right. So what I want to do is move his all of his tire above the ground plane just a little bit, and then I'll type rotate, and I'll come in here to where the apex is. I still have ortho on, so I'll hold shift to unlock ortho, and I'm about that same distance away on the back tire, so that's good. And now I just rotate it and snap it to that ground plane, and now he looks like he's pretty good. So I'll go to my render view. By the way, I use name views a lot. If you don't use them, then you should. If you ever need to redo a render ever, like I have needed to do for portfolio work, saving name views to get the same render but updated is really amazing. Or just even in the same workflow, if you want to keep going back to the same view because you feel like you found that sweet spot that was just perfect, you can save that view and always come back to it without any issues. So I'm going to move this guy around. Have him face a little bit more. Now his tires are under the ground again, so we're just going to kind of move these up a little bit until they look like they're doing pretty good. Okay, so it looks like we have the material, but if we render that, it's still going to maintain that white background, and that's what a picture frame does. Now if we open up our Vray material editor, we can go to create standard material. We'll call this bike guy, and for the diffuse we're going to click that little M, which is a map, and then you have a huge selection of things to pick from. We're going to do text bitmap, and we're going to choose bike guy. Then we're going to go ahead and come to the transparency and click the M for map again, text bitmap, then we're going to select the alpha. Now we made the alpha black background white what we want. I think that usually that's the opposite in Photoshop, so we're going to need to actually invert that so that when we hit preview, it's black guy and white background. Then we select the guy, apply that material, and he looks pretty good. So far, so good. So I'll go ahead and give that a render. As you may have noticed, and I may have mentioned it, but the tune, I like putting the tune materials on often, but rendering people this way conflicts with that. So you can see the tune is basically the outline, and we will observe that here in a second, how this technique affects the tune. So go ahead and give that a render. And as you can see, as we get along in the render, the bounding box of that plane has caused the tune to disappear, and that's kind of an annoying issue. However, if you don't use tune, which photorealistic, and in the case of using people in this manner, you most likely won't use tune anyways, or maybe you will, and that's just your preference. I don't know, but if I'm going to try and achieve a photorealistic scale figure this way, I will most likely not use tune. But again, to each his own. One of the really nice things is a shadow. If you've ever tried to put a guy in a bicycle in a render, you might know that getting a good shadow is impossible, but in this case it's not. It looks pretty good. You can see in the window reflection that it's actually reflecting his front side, and he's not facing the window, so that's not possible. Now the reflections are low enough to where you can't see it, and that's probably the biggest problem with this technique. But what you can do, if you really wanted to, is basically render this image once with him in it and then once without him in it, and then bring it in Photoshop and just mask out where he is on the window. That way he doesn't show up in the window. But then of course there's the question of, well, why isn't he in the window? So he's either not going to be in the window for a weird reason, or he's going to be in the window and it's going to be reflecting the wrong side of him for a weird reason. Either way, it seems pretty trivial, and if you populate the inside of the building or whatever and just add other components, then it'll start to sort itself out pretty easily. And I have it in grayscale mode because I didn't want to worry about the color temperature, but as you can see, he matches pretty well. He's got a little bit more red and orange in him, and his highlights are a little bit stronger. That's because the sun that I used in here is size 20, And I did that so that you can see how dramatic the shadows can really get, and how impressive that can be. People will most likely be asking you, how did you do that? I know I asked that question for a long time. But for the most part, the exposure looks pretty good, I think. But it's easier to look at without so much warm colors. Anyhow, let's move on to adding the girl with her horse. So we're going to do the same procedure. Picture frame. Click on it. I'm going to assume that her foot to her head is also her total height, and I just want to make sure that she's not too tall or too short. And right here, I think that looks okay. I mean, maybe the top of her forehead comes up to the handlebars of the bicycle. That seems fine. So I'll leave that. And we're going to do the same thing here with the material on her. We're going to call her girl horse. Click the M for map. Bitmap. We want the image of the girl. Do the same thing for transparency map, bitmap, and the black and white. Again, we need to click the invert, hit OK. Make sure she's selected on the model and apply material to selection. Bam. Now we're going to put her inside. So again, I'm going to use my named views to try and figure out where to put her. Now her feet are under the ground, or the horse's feet are under the ground. So it's kind of hard to tell where the horse is. If I put the horse up right here, then it's going to cast a shadow off the ground, and that's going to look really wonky. So I'm going to move this down until it starts to get cut off. And then I'm going to just slightly move it above. So this window opening here is going to cast light inside of the building, and hopefully she's in a position where she's going to receive some of that light, so you can really start to see where else this technique is really strong. So if you have big windows in a building and you have light coming through, then you can have the person standing partially in the sun ray and partially in the shade of the interior of the building, and having them render in with the lighting of your model will actually produce usually really good results. So let's go ahead and give this a render, and we'll see how she looks. You can see the horse shadow is looking pretty good, cast right on the floor. So from the shadow you can tell that her whole body is being hit by the light. So I'm going to cancel that, and I'm going to move it and rotate it ever so slightly. Go ahead and hit render again. Now she's a little bit too much in the shade. You can see that the horse's elbow, I guess, is receiving a little bit more light. Let's see what we can do here. Perhaps the bottom half of them will be in the light. Oh, I'm rendering from the other side of the wall. Let's just go ahead and exaggerate the camera a little bit. So it looks okay. Changing the camera this way is kind of makes it look a little wonky. I just can't find that sweet spot where she's partially in the shadow and partially not. Perhaps this will be the ticket. Close. Either way, I think that the point is made pretty clear in that rendering people from images, once you can produce the alpha and quickly make the materials, it becomes really easy and really quite powerful. Here it looks pretty good. You can see the shadows missing the bottom, but everything up top is getting really exposed by the light. It's even more apparent when you turn the color back on. Well, I think the takeaways are that this technique produces really amazing shadows that are otherwise impossible to do in Photoshop. The illumination is really good, and it can only be made better if you process the image before you bring it into Vray, and it can actually be really fast. The downside to it is the tune shader. It interfaces with that pretty poorly, and the reflections. But because these are not three-dimensionally modeled people and they're just planes, the data, I believe, is much more simple, and so it's not as taxing as if you had a 3D model that was highly detailed from 3ds Max or ZBrush or something along those lines. I hope this video was useful. It ended up being a little bit longer than I wanted, but hopefully, at least in the first half, my point was made clear and you stuck around because you love me. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more junk in the future. Bye.